Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Carrie.
Sonia, let's talk about our favorite cookbooks.
I could talk to you about this all day long, every day.
Totally. But I think we want to start off with what makes a good cookbook? Like, what do we feel like are the criteria of a great cookbook?
Yeah, and I think it does differ for each person. I'm really interested in what it is for you. So for me, I really do have clarity on what I'm looking for in cookbooks generally. I will put aside like vintage and specialty cookbooks out of this category because those are a whole other topic. But in like a cookbook that I'm planning to use, I'm looking for the recipes to work. That's like my number one criteria. I feel like it's so sad to invest in something, make a recipe, and it doesn't work. Second, is that there's at least three dishes, like upon scrolling through, upon like flipping through, that I immediately want to make. That whether I make it or not, I feel like that's usually my number of like, I see 3 or 4 things right away, I'm in.
Where
That
you get
book.
that jolt of
Yeah,
excitement, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh,
exactly.
how great. Yeah.
And the other thing for me is I really love a cookbook that has a story to tell. So I love a POV. I love learning about something I didn't know. And I also love head notes. Like I love great writers. Ruth Reichel is one of these amazing cookbook writers and head note writers. There's so many. But yeah, those are usually the things I'm looking for. And of course, like just inspiring images or layouts don't hurt.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's a lot of different categories of cookbooks that I own. And so I think, I guess if you're at a store and if I'm at a store and I'm looking for a cookbook that I'm going to buy myself, I agree with you. I think I want to find 3 to 5. We had a listener reach out to us and say she wants 10 good recipes before she invests in a cookbook, which I think like that number is going to be different for everyone. But I think what I also really love is I like a lot of different categories. Like I want to, I sort of want it to fit into my kitchen for many different occasions. But then there's also those cookbooks that I have bought like when I'm traveling. I bought this really beautiful cookbook, brought a beautiful cookbook back from Thailand, and it's so beautiful. I've never made one recipe. I'm so intimidated by it. But when I look at it, I think about that trip. And so I just think there's so many of these different, there's the cookbooks that my mom gave me from, our church community that I grew up in. And, I cook some of those recipes because they're recipes that my mom cooks. And when I look at them, it's a collection of recipes. So everyone submitted their recipes and their name is in there. And so it just makes me feel like so connected to my community that I came from. So I think there's also space for those cookbooks too.
Yeah, this is a very big topic. So we're really just trying to hone in. I feel like there's a way to think about this, and we sort of gave ourselves parameters and categories to make these lists. So we're not going to focus on the nostalgic, personal cookbooks. We're really thinking about cookbooks, why we love them, and why others might love them too. So the first category that I think is interesting to think about is what cookbook, Carrie, have you actually cooked the most recipes from?
Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about the answer to this question, and I came up with a cookbook that you might find unexpected. It's called The 150 Best American Recipes. It's a collection of recipes that are curated by Fran McCullough and Molly Stevens. I have it sitting in front of me. And what I love about it is that there are recipes in that cookbook from so many different sources. So some of them come from magazines that we know, like Food and Wine and Bon Appetit, and then newspapers you've heard of, like the Los Angeles Times. But then some of them just come from these very obscure places. And I've cooked so many different recipes out of there, appetizers, soups. There's a brisket that I cooked out of there many years ago for many different clients. Still the best crab cake recipe that I cook is
Oh,
from that
wow.
cookbook. And then a couple of like great desserts I made cinnamon rolls a few years ago at Christmas that I wrote in ink in that cookbook. These are amazing. And then, these like lemon cookie sandwiches that I made for clients, like for, 4th of July and like cookouts and things. And so I think, what I love is that there's a variety of recipes that come from this book, and I also love that the authors introduce, like, a story for each of the recipes, and so I always found that super charming of, like, where did this recipe come from? Why did they choose it? And they also give notes from their test kitchen, and so it's like how to make the recipe a little bit better or what's something that you might wanna do while you're making it.
Yeah. When you were talking about like what you're looking for in a cookbook and you're like, I like a lot of different categories, that's something I never even think about. I don't know why. It doesn't really occur to me. You know, one thing I do look for though is a good dessert section because I love to bake. So if a book has a great dessert section, I'm in. But, I've never even seen this book, and there's something really appealing to me about a book that has culled together recipes and curated recipes. Is kind of what we do here is swap recipe notes, and I love the idea of experts like Fran McCullough and Molly Stevens doing that for me.
Well, it's funny, the person I found out about this cookbook from was from this woman that I would see at the grocery store. And there was a grocery store that when I was a personal chef, I would go to every single day, and I would just kind of recognize people. And at one point, we got into a conversation, and I said, "What's your favorite cookbook?" And she told me this cookbook, and I was like, "Really?" Like, it's kind of surprised me. But to your point, I feel like these women were kind of my first food friends. This was before I really knew you and talked to you about cookbooks and recipes and hosting and all the things that we talk about here. And even in their introductions, there's this introduction I want to read to you. It says it's a recipe for fresh corn soup, and it's by Diana Kennedy from her cookbook The Essential Cuisine of Mexico. And it says, "This is, in our opinion, one of the great soups of the world. It's a delicate soup with a little touch of poblano chilies and a crunch of crisp fried tortillas. It's also a very easy soup to make if you have a food mill, and it allows you to use one of the great convenience foods, frozen corn kernels. Anyone who still thinks Mexican food is coarse and fiery will be stunned by the elegance of this simple soup." And then they add, "Because this soup freezes well, you can make lots and keep it on hand for a quick bowlful anytime." I mean, like, I read every introduction to every recipe because I'm so charmed by what they have to say about it.
It's very sweet. Well, I definitely will now check it out for sure. And by the way, like the library is incredible for this. You can get almost any book and you can request it if they don't already have it. They'll sometimes order it for you too. So this is definitely going to go on my library list. The one, book that I've cooked the most recipes from, it was hard for me to pick. There's a couple, but I really counted like where because I put little stickies, in books where I've
Yes,
made
yes.
something and by far the winner ended up being Jerusalem by Yotam Ottolenghi and Sami Tamimi. It's an incredible book. Sami Tamimi is Palestinian and Yotam Ottolenghi is Israeli, and they were both born in Jerusalem and grew up in Jerusalem and found each other in London as gay men in London with these similar and opposite backgrounds, and they form this incredible business together, Ottolenghi. And this book is, I think, one of the most extraordinary cookbooks. I stand by that. And it happens to be a book that I've cooked so many things from. And I think it sort of came into the world after I'd already been working in food for a while. So it wasn't one of those books that like taught me how to cook, but it was one of those books that I've certainly influenced and elevated my cooking. So I remember right away I made the butternut squash and tahini spread, and which is drizzled with pomegranate molasses. And buying pomegranate molasses changed my cooking. I think that I probably learned that from his first book, Plenty, but still, it's an ingredient I use now over and over and over again in different ways. And then there's a great mihadra, I think that's how you say it, a lentil and onion, fried onion dish. That's how I learned to fry onions, dusted in a little flour, and that topping isn't just great for rice and lentils. It's great for a quinoa dish. It's great on top of a salad. It's great in so many different things. That taught me that. Was a beautiful lamb stuffed quince recipe. You know how I love quince. Babka. There's this delicious clementine and almond syrup cake. There's just such a wide range of very vegetable and flavor forward dishes and produce forward. I just think it's a classic.
Well, and to your point, you could take those ideas with you into other recipes and into other, into your kitchen every time that you cook. And I think what a cookbook like that does for the world is it reminds us of how food connects us and unites us. And, that's so much of how our friendship has developed, right? Is over sharing recipes and sharing meals and sharing these stories. And, I think that's like a classic cookbook for good reason, obviously.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, so next category. What is the cookbook that most inspired you or maybe changed your idea or perspective on a particular cuisine?
So I received a book, this cookbook called Food of Life by I'm going to make sure I say her name, Najmieh Batmanglij. I called my friend to ask her how to say it properly, but this is one of the cookbooks in Persian cooking that's kind of considered like a classic, like a tome of Persian cooking. And a friend of mine gave this to me as a gift. I had Her daughter was sick and I had taken soup to her daughter, and she in return copied one of the recipes out of this cookbook called Sabzi Gourmet Sabzi,
Oh,
which
gourmet
is
sabse, yeah.
yes, which is a very special Persian dish, and it's really, it's a braised that I think you can make it with beef or lamb. I made it with lamb, and it has a lot of different herbs and kidney beans in it. And when she gave me the recipe, she also gave me the ingredients that she assumed I would not have at my house, which I did not, like dried limes and fenugreek
Yeah,
and
fenugreek.
all
Yeah.
these herbs, which sometimes her mom would use, like because you use so many herbs, you can buy these, like, frozen packets of herbs from the Persian store, and so she gave me a couple of those too, and, after I made it and I sent her pictures of it, like, she ended up giving this to me for the holidays, and probably the best thing that she did was she went through and she took Post-it notes and put them on every page of the recipes that she thought that I should make that were more like the food that her grandmother and her mother made, and she gave me a book that has 33 Post-it notes in it, and it really, for me, as, like, a Midwestern girl, was such a window into a world that I just didn't even really know existed growing up, and I really haven't cooked out of this cookbook. I think I'm still a little bit like I'm intimidated by it, but it's like the pictures are so beautiful. There's so many flavors, so many herbs, so many incredible ways to cook rice, and there's all these ceremonies in this book, and I just it's really something that, like, as a cook, I really want to get into that space. And, it's just part of it has been like I received that book when my son was really little. And so it's just been, raising a small child. Now he's a lot older. And so I have more time to take on a project like this. But it was such an inspiring book to receive. And every time I look at it, it makes me laugh and it makes me feel like she's hugging me when I see the amount of post-it notes that she left for me in this book.
You actually, in classic Carrie style, then proceeded to give me a copy of this
Oh
book.
my gosh, I forgot
So
that.
I own this book and I love Persian food. I had a serious Persian boyfriend for many years, and his mom actually taught me how to make ghormeh sabzi,
Oh,
which
wow.
is the stew dish you're talking about. It's just a tremendous amount of herbs, with fenugreek being the main herb, and it has that kind of mapley flavor. It's such a unique and amazing flavor. Persian food is so vast and incredible and has so many different spices and ingredients and combinations of flavors. It's one of my absolute favorite cuisines, and I think this is like a definitive guide to that world if someone is curious. It's such a beautiful book to receive from someone.
Well, and the other thing that I find, and maybe this is just anecdotal, but the thing that I find to be true about Persians is similar to the Indians, where they say, like, don't go to Indian restaurants. Like the Persians will say, don't go to Persian restaurants, come to my house, or you have to have my auntie's this or my grandmother's this. And it really is a cuisine of true home cooks and of such special nuance. And so I do think a cookbook like this can really introduce people to those flavors. And I'm so glad that I own it, and it really is on my list of things to, to learn more.
Yeah. By the same token, my most inspiring book may even surprise you because it's actually a Ukrainian cookbook. And that is obviously cuisine very familiar to me. I grew up in a home of people who immigrated from the former Soviet Union from Ukraine. And the book is called Summer Kitchens. It's by Olia Hercules. And it's truly one of the most beautiful books, like, physically and image-wise that I've ever looked at. Olia worked in Ottolenghi's kitchen, I've mentioned this before, and she's a tremendously talented recipe developer, but she's also a true scholar and almost like a journalist of Ukrainian and Carpathian and, Georgian and all these different styles of cookings in that region. She leads tours there. So this book of all her books, and I have every one she's ever published, but this may be my absolute favorite and the most inspiring because it felt familiar, but also like a window into a world that I had heard about in my family, but hadn't ever got to experience myself. The way that people spent summers, the way that they preserved produce. There's this great recipes for like fermented peppers that are stuffed with sauerkraut or, pickled watermelon, which I've made, but it was just nice to see an even more interesting method. She had like vareniki or pilmeni, these kinds of traditional dumplings, but she stuffs them with sauerkraut and makes the dough with spelt. And there's also even a recipe in there for marinated mushrooms that is almost identical to what my dad and my grandmother both always make, and I never had a written recipe. So I remember talking to my dad once I saw this recipe. I was like, "Is this how you do it?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, that's almost exactly how I do it." And so now I've been making that every year especially if I find mushrooms in the wild, if I go mushroom hunting. It just feels like one of those books that connects me to a deeper side of my heritage, which is really inspiring. But I also think it's a book that if you had no relationship to this world, you would still find so much beauty and inspiration and
Well, I
interest
think
in
what I
it.
love about what you're saying is that, like, this is a person who, grew up, it comes from the same kind of place that you do, but also has this scholarly background and can really elevate what these recipes are into like a professional setting so that you can, you could learn this from your dad, but like your dad isn't a professional cook. So her ability, because she's worked in Oda Lengi's kitchen and other kitchens, like to translate those recipes for people like you, or also for people like me who have no like connection to that, is such a special thing. It's almost
Yeah,
like
it's
we
really
met.
it's a documentation. I wouldn't necessarily say
Yes.
she's always an elevation, although I do think she does put little modern twists or her own touches, which are very beautiful, but it really is like preservation of a way of life too. It somehow she straddles that line between old and new really masterfully.
That's so beautiful. I want that cookbook. Well, we have a third category of cookbook, and that's the one that we each give as gifts. And so I'm wondering, I mean, I've received many cookbooks from you as gifts, but I'm wondering if there's one that really stands out to you as like the cookbook you like to give as a gift and why.
It's really tied, so I'm just gonna mention both because and first of all, I give cookbooks all the time to everyone, and usually it's a quite a big variety, but I was like, "Okay, what have I really given the most of?" One is Marcella Hazan's Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking, because I feel like every home cook should have that on their shelf. It's such a masterpiece of recipes and Italian cooking, and every recipe is genius and delicious and perfect. The other one, though, that I've been giving more and more often lately is Julia Turshen's first cookbook, Small Victories. Julia Turshen is a very accomplished cookbook author, and she had written other cookbooks before, but this was her first solo cookbook, I believe. But the thing is, I just love this idea that when we can execute a recipe, no matter how simple, it really feels like a victory. And it really, those wins add up. And we often don't even celebrate the small wins. I certainly don't feel like I do it enough. But I love that even in the title itself, it's inviting you to say, like, cooking can feel triumphant. Cooking can feel like an accomplishment. I think it's so wonderful, especially for young people or people just starting to cook. And true to that title, the recipes are really uncomplicated. There's like a really great meatball recipe, there's a super easy chocolate cake, there's this incredibly simple but alluring raspberry bun, like kind of like a cinnamon bun but with raspberries. And there's also a curried lentil dish that's almost identical to what you and I make with the red lentils, like a coconut red curry lentil dish. This is true like home cooked food. And yeah, I just love to be able to share that with someone, have them have the feeling of being victorious.
Well, I also think that that idea applies to people like you and me who do cook all the time because I think that it's a reminder that, like, the simple act of chopping an onion and turning that into something that nurtures yourself and nurtures the people around you is a small victory. And to your point, like, they do add up over time if we just take a second and kind of acknowledge what that is. And, the produce that we bring into our homes, we spend a lot of time going to the farmer's market and connecting with people. Like, there's so much energy that you can really deepen into if you just take a second to do it. So I love that idea.
Absolutely. Okay, so what books are you giving the most often?
Well, what has risen to the top of my list is your book, Braids. I have given that by far the most recently. I've also mentioned this other book called Love Soup, and I've gifted that many times. But one of the books that I really love to give is the Cook's Illustrated Cookbook. And I've gifted that many times, especially to younger people who, some of the kids from the families that I cooked for when they graduated from high school or from college, moved into their first apartment. Cooks Illustrated was such a space that really supported me. I was always a magazine subscriber, and I liked to read those recipes because they always explained, like, if you want to make a pot roast, here's how it's kind of like mediocre, and here's how to make it a lot better.
Yeah.
And here's why. There was so much chemistry. And even though I'm not really like a chemistry kind of cook, like I don't love baking for the chemistry pieces of that, but I do like to understand why you should spend 10 minutes browning your pot roast before you braise it. And, what you were mentioning about like taking, these ideas from Odo Lengi's cookbooks into your other recipes, I feel like Cooks Illustrated really helped me up level so much of my cooking.
Mhm.
And so I feel like giving a cookbook like that is not sexy. It doesn't have pictures. There are only a few diagrams in that. Giving that to a young person as like, look, when you really need to make like a chicken soup because you're sick and you're away from home, here's a good way to do it. Or when you're thinking about making your first brisket, like go to this cookbook and look for the recipe.
I love that you've shared 2 anthologies. I do think these are the kind of cookbooks I sometimes forget are so useful as tools, and I absolutely understand why you're sharing Cooks Illustrated specifically with people who are starting out. I also think they just write those recipes in such a compelling way that even if it is like a complicated scientific process they're explaining, they make it really interesting, and I don't own that cookbook either, so now that's another one I'm excited to check out.
Yeah, I highly recommend it, and I just think it's a great one to have on your shelf, especially when you're like, "Wait, how do I make an apple pie?" This is a great place to go and find out.
Yeah.
So, our next category is, a cookbook that maybe changed the way you cook forever, like something that
Yeah,
changed.
change the game, that
Yeah,
changed the
changed
way
the
you
game for
cook.
you. Yes.
There's sort of one that I just couldn't omit, which is, The Book of Jewish Food by Claudia Rodan. I think this is the most important Jewish cookbook ever written. I will go on record as saying that. As someone who has deeply cared about Jewish food just because it's not only my background, but a sort of passion in terms of research and developing. I've been writing about Jewish food for a long time. I remember this being one of the first cookbooks that I bought that was specifically dedicated to Jewish cooking. But what Claudia Rodan did, that very few people did of her time, is she served the entirety of the Jewish diaspora. She didn't just focus on Ashkenazi food or Mizrahi food or Sephardic food. She went and was like, here's what they were cooking in Iraq. Here's what they were cooking in India, where there's a very meaningful Jewish community. Here's what the Polish Jews were cooking. Here's the history of what this people has been cooking in all these different places and the conversations between people. I think the richness of the history of that book is second to none, and the fact that she really felt like one of the first people to say, like, we need to acknowledge not just one kind of Jewish food, but the true, like, rainbow, the pantheon of it. And there's history in there that I just didn't read in other places. There's certainly other books that have explored the diaspora. I don't wanna make it sound like she's the only person in history who's ever done that, but I think that others would agree with me that she did it at such an incredible level and such an inclusive and dynamic level. And also, and her recipes are phenomenal. They really work. And
That matters.
that matters. And her language is phenomenal. Her writing ability, the poeticism, the literary qualities of it. It's like windows into worlds and also windows into tastes. And yeah, it changed me. It made me look at things through a bigger lens.
Well, I have a question about, understanding Jewish food as, through the diaspora. Like when you read those recipes from different parts of the world, do you notice that there are through lines? Like, does it help you see that there are through lines of Jewish food that whether you're cooking in Iraq or you're cooking in India or you're cooking in America, that Jews do some of the same things no matter where you are in the world?
Well, this is the $1,000,000 question, and I've actually been in rooms full of Jewish food writers where no one can answer this. Like,
All right.
what is the definition? But the through line often is the ritual. Like,
Right.
what are the dishes you can make on a Friday night and keep warm through Saturday? So that might be a stew or a braise. What
Right.
are the sacred breads that you're making to break bread with community over a holiday or over the Sabbath? Like, yeah, the through line tends to be ritual based as opposed to ingredient based.
Well, I love that, and as a person who really loves Jewish food, like, now I wanna own that cookbook, and it's curious to think about, like, what do Jews in India cook? Like, I don't know, and I imagine that it's very much informed by all the spices and all the produce that's
Certainly.
right in front of them.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal. That type of cooking is so fascinating to me. But Carrie, I'm also dying to know what book changed you.
So this is another kind of obscure one. It's called The Improvisational Cook by Sally Schneider. And I think I bought this book at a really small cookbook store called the Cook's Library that has is now closed in Los Angeles. But um, I don't know what drew me to this cookbook, except, or I might have received it as a gift. Now I don't know where it came from, but what I really love about this cookbook is that it really helped me push beyond the boundaries of recipes because what she does is she kind of deconstructs these ideas and she she pushes them into all these different directions. So there's like a deconstructed Caesar salad, slow roasted tomatoes that become an appetizer, a pasta sauce, a tart, a soup, or a jam. And she encourages you to like swap ingredients that are similar, and she shows pictures of them. So it's like edamame, lima beans, favas, and peas, and that you can choose one or a combination of these and put them into a saute with asparagus and some herbs, and they'll taste similar but different. And she also talks about taking leftovers like a braised meat, like, and this is where I think I up leveled some of my cooking as a personal chef. Like, you braise a short rib and I would serve it like a very like a, on a bed of mashed potatoes as like a very special main at a fancy dinner party. But if there are a few of those short ribs left and I took them home, how could I stretch that meat and put it over like buttered Parmesan noodles and make like a totally different kind of pasta dish?
I love this. It's another book I don't know and I don't own, so you're introducing me to a lot of new cookbooks, but it also reminds me of why I like Julia Turshen's Small Victories because she has a section of, like, here's what to do with
That's
your
right.
leftovers,
Yes.
and I think that that is such a unique twist. Not most cookbooks don't offer that, so that's very inspiring. Okay, we have one last category, and it I'm excited to share the one from this one, but it's what cookbook taught us taught either of us to cook. Like, what is the book that really taught you how to cook or completely radically influenced your cooking style?
And I'm curious, what is your cookbook?
So it more influenced me than maybe taught me, but the Prune Cookbook by Gabrielle Hamilton will also always remain in my top 10 favorite cookbooks. I think reading it, I was just my mind was blown with, like, every page. I had just never seen a cookbook like this because it was like a window into a restaurant chef, but how do you put that restaurant and the principles and the values of restaurant into a home kitchen? And then with really simple but very high quality ingredients used in kind of radical or unexpected ways. So she has like a Manti recipe, which is a Uzbeki dumpling, which I had and I've made versions of. But she invites you to use, store-bought wonton wrappers. So toasted wonton Monty, these little lamb dumplings with also, I think, not even a homemade broth. I think she even used some kind of it was something like that where it gives you permission to make, like, high-level food, but with help from store-bought ingredients. It has recipes, like, at the very back about how to use all these things we typically throw out, like, she views those things as, like, sacred objects, so there's a recipe for the tops of zucchini, like, the tops that you normally trim, and she braises them, and she would serve them to her favorite customers. There's a recipe for what to do with wilted celery, and then there's, like, simple, like, take one ingredient and make it amazing, like cold candied oranges, like these just kind of simmered oranges that then you chill. I just love her style. I love her brashness in the book. I love the images.
She's so bossy.
Yeah.
It's like she's in the kitchen with you, and, I think you gifted me this cookbook too, as you know, and what I love about it is I feel like she's in the kitchen with me, and she's kind of yelling at me, and she's kind of yelling at you as, like, a loving older sister who's
Yes.
"Do it the way I'm telling you, and this is why you should do it this way." And I also love this reminded me of when you were talking about Martha Stewart's entertaining cookbook and how there are all these, like, recipes for, like, 50 people. And what I love about Gabrielle Hamilton's, it's like you can make this times 20, 20 orders, or she breaks it down if you just have 4 people at your table. And
Yeah, she has,
so
like, little pieces of tape
yes,
that are
tape,
photo
yes.
yeah, like, painter's tape that you would use in a restaurant, and on there, she's like, "Okay, if you're making this for 12, this is you have to exit by this amount." It's so cool, and it I think it just planted that seed again and really nurtured that idea of, like, don't waste anything.
Yes.
Take incredible seasonal things and make them shine in simple ways. That really influenced me as a chef.
Yeah, and one last thing to note about that cookbook is it is absolutely gorgeous. The
So
color
beautiful.
of that cookbook is so pretty, and so I generally don't like to keep it on my bookshelf. I like to keep it out somewhere so I can look at it. But a cookbook that really changed the way that I cook, and I think it's in the same vein as what you said too, is that it really more influenced me, is actually the Santa Monica Farmers Market Cookbook by Amelia Saltzman. And I came upon that as a very young personal chef who wasn't from California, who had moved here and discovered the Santa Monica Farmers Market. And it was this place that I really felt like I found my people there. I just found like that was a place that welcomed me, and it was a place that I felt inspired to be in. And seeing that cookbook and reading her recipes really helped me kind of ground into the beauty of what was all around me and how special it was to have these farmers who are bringing bringing this incredible produce, and the value. What she does in that cookbook, in addition to having these great recipes, is she tells stories about each farmer. And so what it invited me to do was to like get to know my farmers better, and that when you get to know your farmers, you they'll tell you like, this is what is amazing today, this is a special week, this is the last week for this. And a lot of her recipes, I've cooked a lot of the things that there's a melon salad that she cooks that she offers in there. Like, I grew up eating melons, melons from the grocery store in the summer, but like eating the melons from the farmer that I also worked for, like all the different kinds of melons, you realize, like, if you're buying seasonal produce from farmers who are growing it with love and care, like it makes your food the simplest food tastes so much better.
Yeah, she's a real fixture of the sort of Santa Monica food world and in Los Angeles. And I always see her partnering with Suzanne Goen or other famous women chefs in Los Angeles. I love that book. I own that book too. And it really is like when I first moved to Los Angeles, it was like a window into Los Angeles as a way to anchor into the seasonality and the produce and what to do with everything. My market was more the Hollywood farmers market, but they're similar. They're both incredible markets that even have overlapping farmers. But I love this tip that you're offering, that like a farmers market book that tells the stories of the farmers then invites you to connect to the farmers and learn more about their story. And so many cities and places have their own farmers market cookbook. So it's almost worth seeing if your local market, if you live in a big city, if they might have one.
Yeah, and what are the stories of the people that are right around you? I think
Yeah.
as a girl from a small town that like really knew the people around me, this was an invitation for me to like make this my neighborhood market even though I've never lived in Santa Monica. I am always driving over there, but I just think it's so special. And again, as a new cook, I also loved that I would always see her at the farmer's market. Like, she's such
Yeah.
a warm person, and I'm sure she has no idea who I am, but I feel like she had such an impact on my cooking, and helped me translate those stories to my clients, which also changed the way that they ate, which was really, really key to how a lot of different people eat in this city now.
I think if you see her, you need to go up and tell her that.
Well, maybe we'll send her this episode.
Yeah, I definitely think it would be sweet for you two to connect. No one doesn't love hearing that you love their book. So, from personal experience, I can tell you this was really fun.
This was really fun, and I feel really inspired by, all these different kinds of cookbooks. I think there's space for all of them and more, and we'll share more ideas on our Substack too.
Yeah, and we'll link all the books in our show notes.
Until next time.
Until next time,
Bye.
bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.